Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Remus. On behalf of America's Job Exchange, thank you for joining us today for Recruit Smarter, Analyzing Your Veteran Engagement. Before we get started, I do have a few notes. Please use the Q&A feature to submit questions at any time. We'll plan to address your questions during the presentation as we're able, and if we don't get to your question today, we'll get back to you with an answer via email. Please just allow a few days for that response. And since we do get this one question a lot, yes, we will be mailing a copy of the slides presented today and a link to the recording to you in the next few days. Finally, after this event, a short survey will pop up. If you could take a minute to let us know what you thought of today's presentation, we greatly appreciate it. We do use your feedback to inform future programming. And now I'd like to introduce today's fantastic speakers. From RallyPoint Networks, please welcome Brandon Charters, who is Vice President of Customer Accounts. And joining Brandon is Matt Donoghue, Director of Recruitment Marketing at Cielo RPO. Thank you, Brandon and Matt. Thanks to you both for being here. And I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Lauren, thank you so much. This is Brandon here, and I'm very honored to be here with everybody today on a Zoom conference, probably thousands of Zoom conferences that everyone has been on in the last 90 days, but honored to be talking to you today about a topic that I know Matt and I are very passionate about, which is the recruitment of veterans and effectively engaging those veterans in your workforce. And a quick background on me, I'm a 5-year Air Force veteran, transitioned out as a captain, and I was under Air Force Space Command for about 5 years in the military. That today is also known as Space Force. If you've seen the news and you've seen the organization of the Air Force command structure, it was a fun time. I was working on primarily launch vehicle development technology and transitioned into the aerospace and defense industry. That was a logical transition for my skill set. And in 2012, I met the co-founders of RallyPoint, and they're actually located not far from Matt Donoghue, who you're going to hear from in a moment, in our Boston headquarters office. And that journey of starting RallyPoint from the beginning was really where I got into the space of really looking at the veteran community and how we could support them from a talent and transition standpoint. Excited to be here today. I run our account management team and work with great partners like Matt and the CLO team that we've had a great partnership with, and ultimately helping them better engage our community. So thank you again for your time today, and I look forward to talking more. And Matt, I'll hand over to you for intro.
Great, thanks Brandon. Hello everyone, Matt Donoghue here, the Director of Recruitment Marketing here at Cielo Talent. For those who don't know, Cielo Talent is a full service RPO, but also provides other HR talent acquisition related functions. I have 20 years, first of all, I should say that I'm a civilian, but have a passion for all sorts of diversity recruitment initiatives, obviously military being one of them. As Brandon spoke about, have a great partnership with RallyPoint and the overall mission and strategy that they have basically aligned with my personal and professional goals as far as how we recruit smart and how we recruit right. So 20 years of talent acquisition I have under my belt. The first 10 years were spent in the staffing agency world. And then for the last almost 10 years, I've been in the recruitment marketing and employer branding space. Prior to joining Cielo, I spent about 7 years at TMP Worldwide, where I ran the entire recruitment marketing, employer branding, and overall HR talent acquisition programming functions for UPS, which is TMP's largest partner. And now here at Cielo, as the Director of Recruitment Marketing, I oversee all aspects of our clients' recruitment marketing, social media, employment branding functions. And along with that comes our specific strategies that we consult with our clients on for the purposes of this conversation related to veteran recruitment and how we effectively go to market and make sure that we're effectively communicating and engaging with that audience that way. So that's it for me.
Matt, thanks again. And for everyone online, Matt's going to act as an interpreter for me as a veteran. Sometimes I go into acronyms and move through content quickly, but it's great. From Matt's perspective, I've enjoyed working with him because of the perspective he gives from the other end of the spectrum, in looking at the veteran community, for the talent we bring to the table, and obviously his perspective on how he's engaged the military community in his background. So great to be your wingman today, Matt, and Lauren, thank you again for having us. Today, really quick, we'll cover 3 main points. The veteran journey map and experience of all the phases of starting your journey in the military to the day that you transition out. I will plan to talk about that and getting some of Matt's commentary on that. I feel like it's an important exercise for us to look at the different phases that we transition to from our point in the military to when we get out. And then the second piece of that is looking at the core data points that we have as service members. Many of these points of data we translate and wash away. We'll kind of talk about what makes different veterans from different experience levels unique and how they can be assets to your organization. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about how the data points that we talk about can help reshape the way that you engage and hire veterans in your organization. And we plan to cover these 3 topics today. And at any point in time, I know Lauren's got the queue on questions as they come in. Please feel free to write those down, and we'll probably take breaks between if there are questions that come up. So feel free to write those down, and I know Matt and I are happy to take those as we go. Okay, well, I guess we'll jump into the journey map here and give you a perspective of how this was created. A little background on RallyPoint. We're a social and professional platform with 1.7 million members and roughly 6 million member discussions happening. This journey map was created through the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, in the 2015 to 2017 timeframe. Between 2014 and 2017, when the Secretary of the VA was Bob McDonald, who is now the chairman of our board at RallyPoint. And his exercise that he had with the VA in looking at veterans as the core customer that they were serving, they had a human-centered design exercise that they ran to know all of these key phases that we go through as service members when we enter that recruiting office and start to talk to the recruiter about what we're going to do in the military, to the days that we're serving. And there are so many questions that we have as members, as service members, about where we're going to be going and how we can really better ourselves, advance the next rank, and progress in our military career, to the point that we get to the phase where I joke with Matt, the spin cycle, I call it, is where we transition out and we kind of feel like we are constantly in this wheel of reinventing ourselves and transitioning maybe multiple times. Like myself, I transitioned 3 times before RallyPoint was my 3rd transition in the civilian world. So this map that I have in front of you was a lot of work from the VA to understand these phases. And then when Bob came to RallyPoint and looked at the technology that we had, we overlaid our member engagement data with these core phases. So we wanted to understand, where are we seeing the most engagement from our members? Because we are a social platform and we're organized in many different sub-communities, a lot of these sub-communities we found rolled right into this map that was created. So that's the background on this. Matt and I have had really spirited conversations about how this relates to the talent acquisition world. And I think the biggest takeaway is just knowing more about your target audience and knowing more about what we care about as veterans. And you'll see the 2 key phases with the most engagement on our platform, you'll see, is that serving phase, where many of us are trying to figure out, maybe we want to translate or go into a different MOS, military specialty, from where we currently started. We may want to transfer into a different service branch. We need to figure out what professional development schools are going to be good for us in the military. There's so much conversation happening about that in RallyPoint, and we can't just go and Google this usually. As service members and veterans, it's a networking component that we never really had access to before the RallyPoint platform, and now we've got a good way for members to exchange information there. But I guess from the transition piece, and you look at the starting up and getting into preparing for transition, there's so much there that I know Matt has some really interesting pieces there, because we're not only transitioning for ourselves, we're also transitioning with our spouses. and they are typically used to picking up and moving every 2 to 3 years with us wherever we go to the next assignment. And what's great about technology today is we now have all these virtual tools where spouses can actually pick up and stay with the same company, which before in earlier days, we didn't have that same capability. But I know, Matt, I'd love to get your perspective on this map from the recruitment and outreach standpoint, and how you all engage veterans as well.
Yeah, sure. So Brandon showed this to me back in, gosh, I think it was November. And I was completely mesmerized by this because this just told such a story. I mean, I think Brandon or even I could sit and talk for 2 hours about the different stages here, about how this map is laid out, because it is very relevant, not only to the experience as a human, but also the experience as a job seeker. Typically where, as corporate talent acquisition people would step in, I mean, really you could be involved in all phases as far as engaging with the audience, but really when you're looking at that, getting past the getting out stage and getting into the starting up, that starting up, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, but really refers really to transitioning into a civilian career. Mm-hmm. Correct? Yep. And so that's where, from a TA perspective, the more direct engagement begins. And then we move into, and refresh my memory, Brandon, you call that the spin cycle?
Yes, the spin cycle.
The spin cycle. So I call it the rotary because I'm from Massachusetts. But, between taking care of myself, putting down roots, reinventing myself, you'll notice with these stats that Brandon has in here is that when you look at all of the discussions that are taking place, the largest quantity of discussions are starting up and reinventing myself. And I would favor to guess that that is specifically related to, or the majority of the sentiment there is related to careers, whether it be starting a new career, changing careers, or whatnot. I think that, Brandon's spin cycle that he has here is very important, because that's going to be those three elements that are within that spin cycle are constantly changing, and they don't necessarily happen in a sequential order. And then, of course, you get on to retiring. You see the discussions dropping there, but that is still a very active audience to remain engaged with. From a talent acquisition perspective, whether it be via social media, whether they become your company's alumni, if you will. So for me, spending 20 years in talent acquisition, whether it be as an individual recruiter or a leader, seeing the cycle really helped me understand and helped me to educate my teams on how to understand the audience. So just wanted to call that out, that I think that if I had to say it, this slide is probably the most meat within what Brandon and I are talking about.
Totally agree, Matt. And I think the big thing for us is, just like the VA, they were trying to better understand their core customer, and where they can provide resources to those veterans as they went through the different phases of their career. And the same respect, the exercise was helpful for us at RallyPoint, because we want that resource, whatever it is, upstream to the members before they get there. And what's nice is that on our platform, members are in constant conversation about thinking about to that, that next step and where they're going to go. So it's been great to see, because the veteran community is one that's a very tight-knit family. We want to provide that peer-to-peer support. And what's great with the organizations we work with, like you, Matt, and your team at CLO, is your team is constantly engaged upstream in the cycle, even at the serving phase, so that members know that there are corporate opportunities out there for folks, potentially in your MOS, military specialty, people that are coming from your unit. So this is all really helpful information for us as an organization to look at, and hope it's helpful for those on the line to see the different phases that we go through here. And if
I could just add one other thing, Brandon, if you don't mind, sorry. I think that's something else that's important to look at here, and we'll talk about this a bit later into the session, but from an engagement and a social media standpoint, I think part of what piqued my interest so much about looking at this from a visual perspective is that looking at how engaged the RallyPoint members were in specific types of conversations, and at what point in their journey they tend to become more engaged. Like I mentioned before, you look at about 9 million discussions for people who are starting up and 9.5 million for people who are looking at discussions about reinventing themselves. But then when you look at the number of interactions at the bottom of each of those segments, you know, almost in both cases, about 300,000 interactions. And that's just on the RallyPoint platform. I mean, that's not to say what can be done on other social media platforms as well, where we know this audience is sitting.
Yeah, it's great point. And it's incredible. You're right. The engagement levels, when we first started RallyPoint, it was not something we expected to see, you know, this in this format, but the need to help the next generation of veterans is always there from the military community. And of our 1.7 million members, 46% are veteran, 43% are still serving, so active duty, guard, or reserve. And about 11% are civilian supporters, just like Matt and many other recruiters that are on the site, helping to get resources to members when they need it. And that very much is in the form of jobs and career opportunities. So that's a really important aspect of our community. And as we go to the next piece, I want to touch on the next slide, which highlights something I've talked to Lauren about, is knowing the compliance world that you all are in, and understanding veterans, of course, fill the diversity category from a hiring perspective, but also looking at the eras of veterans. So you look at post 9/11 and pre 9/11 veterans. Like my dad was a Vietnam veteran, my grandfather was a World War II veteran. The level of access to resources we have as a post 9/11 veteran are just exponentially greater than previous generations have had. There's also more research around the health and well-being and in the data behind the injuries we have, you know, as we come through our time of service. So thinking through, there's 40,000 nonprofits out there today that serve in some capacity the transition and also the healthcare side of the military community. So when you look at these numbers and you see the 41% of post 9/11 veterans who have a disability rating versus the 21% of the older generation, it's not the 100% scientific answer, you know, but I'm providing some data points to my knowledge as to why we're seeing a higher rate. And of course, the ops tempo and deployments that we've had for such a small force over the last few years since 9/11 has really, I'm sure, increased that percentage as well. Total addressable population in the US, 18.2 million. And of the post 9/11 veterans, as I said, we have a much smaller force today. And since that time period forward, at about 4.2 being post 9/11 vets. So wanted to give you all that as a background and understanding of where we are from a disability standpoint. Unless there's anything here, I will cover in the next slide a little bit about post 9/11 veterans and our challenges with underemployment. Up until COVID-19, we were doing great from an employment perspective. Recent polls that we've had on RallyPoint, which I'll share at the very end, we do have unemployment as another main challenge hitting us and obviously the rest of the country. But the underemployment challenge has been there ever since, even before I joined the military, about roughly in the 2004, 2005 timeframe. This challenge of us having an issue translating our skills, I've talked to Matt about this. We don't flow into an applicant tracking system as neatly as you're probably used to seeing in other, you know, Indeed platforms or Career Builder or Glassdoor, whatever it is that you're attracting talent. We are square peg trying to go through a round hole in a lot of ways when it comes to our skill sets. And we are learning on the fly in these transition classes to properly get that skill set identified and conveyed to our civilian counterparts. And it is such a challenging process that we end up many times in a position that is underutilizing our skill sets. And that happens, as you see here, 42% felt they were overqualified in this Pew Research poll from 2019. 44% stayed for less than a year. 56% were over that year mark. Lots of turnover. We are translating our skills away. We are learning to not talk in acronyms. We are trying to relate to our civilian, you know, new culture that we're in. And it's tough. And I'll talk a little bit more about the employee resource groups and how those really keep us in our jobs and also connected to peer and mentor support in the organization. But wanted to share these stats with you to just understand that the underemployment challenge is there. And I think a lot of it, when you see organizations hiring 15,000 veterans, As vets, we look at that and think that's great, but we also are a bit skeptical and wondering, where are those veterans in the organization and are they thriving there? Those are important questions for us to know about. After this slide, I want to give you perspective in the next piece here about the data points that really define our military experience. A lot of these things that we wash away when we civilianize our experience. In RallyPoint, we are celebrating those, and we are asking members to not only fill out their civilian bios, but the military experience they had, like the branch of service they were in, the military specialty they held, the units and deployments that they were functioning under and have been on. Of course, all of these things, when you start to look at a veteran connecting to another veteran, are really critical in, when we look back at that journey map, the amount of engagement that we see in our community because we have this common bond of service. And I can know that Carlos, our community manager at RallyPoint, from his civil affairs background, he walked a very different career path than I did in the military, but I have a ton of respect for it because I can look at his pay grade and rank and go, wow, he was a high performer, you know, in his organization, and he did things that maybe a lot of the civilian community may not understand, but I can walk down a military bio and really gain a lot of solid information there. One quick story I have is I was at a defense company, and there was a set of program managers that we called it the bullpen, where we sat, and there was, I was maybe 3 desks away from the other Air Force veteran that I knew was on my floor. The manufacturing facility was maybe 50 yards away, and the operations teams were building hardware for our organization. And I remember talking a lot about the mission set and the work that we were doing inside the company, but I never drilled into understanding more about him as a veteran, what he did, where he served, his deployments, things like that. Until the last week I was on the job, I understood he was at a parent unit to mine, very similar technology we worked on, very similar mission set, there's so many common threads there that I missed out on because we never talked about it and we didn't know about that level. So I'll talk a little bit more in the presentation about ways that I've seen employers try to bring that information to light within the resource groups, and the importance of connecting veterans, not just because I'm a veteran and you're a veteran, you're going to get along great, but like really allowing us to understand the true experience levels. And we do that on RallyPoint through these bios, as I've shared. And I think there's ways to do that also within your resource groups. I think other key point that we have noticed within RallyPoint, the interest categories that members follow. There are obviously key flashpoints of engagement around education and civilian careers, transition, financially planning for your family, talking about your old units or current units that you're in at the 82nd Airborne in the Army. And then there's 6,000 people who follow fishing because that's the things that we like to do as veterans, hunting and fishing and photography and all of these core areas that I've always heard Matt and his team talk about when you're engaging an audience, engaging them where they are and where they are going through their interest categories. Many of those can relate to the industry that you're in attracting that talent. So always kind of thinking about that in the back of your mind. And then lastly, the intent piece, as we were sharing about the journey map, the further upstream you can reach members when they're talking about their transition or their college plans or planning to buy a home and putting down roots that we were talking about in the journey map. We are specializing at the RallyPoint team. We serve core customer verticals, roughly 6 of them: talent recruitment, education, financial services, healthcare, defense technology, and the government and DoD to a certain capacity. And each of these core verticals that we serve are bringing resources upstream to members. And we try to do that within the conversations in providing that. And I think from not only an organization standpoint, but from a recruiter to recruiter end, this is a great place to engage and be a part of conversations with the community. And Matt and I will talk a little bit more about some examples of that in the next slides. After this piece, I'll talk quickly about the helpful points of data that I feel we've seen organizations use and really capitalize on when they've used the RallyPoint platform and they're using some of this information that I just shared with you in key data points on a profile. You start to understand the core branch of service that is showing up in your organization. And there's certain trends around the locations of these veterans, the breakout of officer to enlisted, the military specialties that have been held. I found some really innovative organizations who not only know the most prevalent military specialty, but they know the schoolhouse, the training house in the military, because we're constantly sent to schools, professional development training, leadership training. They've gone so far upstream to know the exact schoolhouse that trains a certain military specialty that if they see that on a resume, they know that translates effectively well for their organization. This 25 uniform, or at least the 25 series, the signals military specialty in the Army, has really done well in the telecommunications world, in that industry, in the civilian side. And there's countless other examples of healthcare organizations who have found combat medics and hospital corpsmen who've done really well. And so they've totally reshaped the way that they're running their outreach because of this trend data. So I wanted to put this out there to understand this is example data we have in the RallyPoint side in organizational pages where members are building their bios and they're putting in their military experience. We're providing this level of insight to the organizations to better understand the talent. In the next slide, it'll show another set of information and kind of a larger perspective of, in bar format, but the totals of each of your service branches and knowing the pay grades of your members. There's consulting firms out there you can imagine that have really capitalized on junior military officers and those that have advanced really quickly in education in the military. And then you've got others that have really started to hire high volume middle range, junior enlisted, as well as non-commissioned officers, and those that have led formations even in the enlisted corps. So understanding the pay grades of the military is really helpful, for your strategy when you're first meeting a member or starting your conversation with a veteran in the hiring process. Just having this background of where is your organization today, what are the most prevalent military specialties, and the last piece, which I think is really critical, is where are these veterans in the organization? Are they technicians, like you'll see here in the bottom right, project managers, operations supervisors? So much more powerful than an MOS translator tool for us as veterans. We want to know, hey, I'm a 68 Whiskey, I'm a healthcare specialist. I would love to know what other 68 Whiskeys are doing inside of your organization. And when you can talk to that, the authenticity level goes through the roof. And when we can see other folks like myself or other veterans that are talking within a certain military specialty group, that gives us a huge level of confidence when we go into an organization and we know they get it, and we can see people thriving in their specialties, and obviously in the organization, the civilian world. So that is, I'll stop here to see if there's any questions. Lauren, I don't know if there's anything that I should help answer at this point. This feels like a good potential stopping point if there's anything out there.
Yeah, Brandon, there was one question that, maybe we can save it to the end, but I've just been monitoring it. So someone did ask about a differentiation between RallyPoint and LinkedIn. And I do feel like maybe if you just make note of that and we address it at the end if we have time, because I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Yeah, happy to do that. The big difference I would describe is when you look at your service in the military and you're in that first, we'll call it the first 4 or 5 years like I was serving, especially if you're in the junior enlisted corps and say you're in a artillery unit, infantry unit, or maybe you have an aircraft maintenance background, the usefulness of a LinkedIn at that point to you is really, it's peripheral. It's great to have the profile. What we're finding, as I shared with you, Matt, and we've had conversations on this, the high levels of engagement that we saw in that serving category is the big differentiator for us, is because we're seeing those 18 to 35-year-olds who are in their first 4 or 5 years of enlistment really getting the crowdsourcing information to help advance their career and to get support from their peers across other service branches, whereas usually we're limited, and I take this for granted today in the civilian world. LinkedIn is an awesome resource to connect across civilian industries and connect with everybody you need to connect with in that world. But when you're in the military, you feel like you're a fish out of water in LinkedIn, as you can imagine. And so I think we just, from an authenticity standpoint, we built the architecture of the site to have all of those key military data points and allow you to connect in that capacity. And then we also connect you, as I mentioned, to the other half of the community that's veteran, so you can see what veterans like yourself are doing. I think that's the big takeaway for us, is just the value you get both in the service and out. If that helps answer the question.
Great, thank you. There's one other question quickly before we move on, but to remind folks that Brandon and I will share our contact information. I know Brandon in his introduction slide had his contact information. We will also be sharing the deck, as Lauren mentioned. But for any follow-up or more detail, both Brandon and I would most certainly welcome any additional questions. Another question, Brandon, that came in from Peter was that you mentioned the MOS translator, and are we going to talk about how the MOS translator is mapped to civilian roles?
Yeah, that's a great point. In RallyPoint, I can tell you, I can give anecdotal examples of the ways that organizations have used the information that from the dashboards I'm sharing here as example data, the way they're using that to translate it. But I will be totally transparent that I'm not the MOS translator expert, but what I will say is anecdotally, there have been a tremendous amount of organizations that we've worked with who have really done that homework and look at. Another example is members in the automotive technology world, the robotics that veterans have been able to work on because of the technology they learned in the active duty side was really a very helpful skill set. And we found that tilt rotor mechanics, for example, have done very well inside of organizations like Tesla, for example. They've really seen a great influx of veterans there, and I've been on the floors there inside the organization, seeing the robotics and how similar it is from a technical standpoint to what has been done in the military. So I won't unfortunately be able to go one for one through a translator tool, but I will say my best advice is to understand where these vets are coming from, to understand their core levels of experience, and understanding where those veterans are in the organization today is really going to be the key to translating those skills and understanding the real life data in front of you and how that's working in your organization. That's what we've seen be most successful, at least through the RallyPoint platform and employers who use it. Any other questions, Matt?
There's one, but I think it's more specific that it would make more sense for you online or offline conversation about.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, and in my email, as you guys saw on the first slide, brandon@rallypoint.com, and happy to have very specific conversations because there are a lot of variations of outreach that we've seen in different categories, and I'm talking anecdotally about a few of them today, but yeah, happy to really help anybody out on the call to look at segmenting our population to, obviously help any organization better understand the talent. And I think when you look at organizations in the locations of where the veterans reside, a lot of this will align with major bases around the country. So in this case, in this example data, you'll see Seattle, Washington, Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is right there, a huge joint base that is logistics hub for the Air Force, for large cargo planes going in and out from the Pacific Theater to the Army presence there on that base. Understanding the locations and where your recruiting strategy is going. And again, finding out if this is a hub of talent for you. This could be a training in a schoolhouse that is effective for your organization. Really important thing to look at, as well as education. If you see any senior leader bio in the military or a senior enlisted member who's been in the military for 15, 20 years, you will see a huge chunk of their bio is education, as we are constantly sent to schools and to learn new things, progress obviously in the leadership capacity, but understanding the types of degrees and again, the degree sets that you see in an organization with your veterans is important piece to look at. Okay, I think that covers the data component, and then really wanted to get into this next piece with Matt because we've had a lot of really good interactions and discussions around what are our members talking about, what are veterans discussing, and these are key high point engagement conversations that I thought would be valuable to share today. As RallyPoint is a crowdsourcing platform, so of these 6 million member discussions and posts that are going on, you're seeing the questions that pertain to transition here about when are we preparing for our transition as we leave the military. Many of us are so far into our jobs, and our ops tempo is so high that we get a very, very short time period to actually truly plan for our transition. And even more importantly, think about what we want to do in the civilian world. Don't sit down with that blank sheet of paper and start to draw it out and say, what are we interested in the civilian world? a big part of that is finding a new mission that means something to you. And so many of our members are sharing a lot of advice to each other about how they went through that journey, when they started, and how to do it effectively. We're also looking at veteran-friendly organizations who say that and have the badges and have all this great swag that says they're a great organization to work for. But in our initial reaction, we have a very pessimistic view of veteran-friendly organizations when they can't accurately describe what veterans are doing in the organization. I've seen employers who've had 5 of their last CEOs, they were veteran. And that is a very validating feeling as a veteran when you think the sky's the limit for you, as you enter an organization. And when that recruiter can tell you what other veterans are doing, and you can give us some testimonials, and I know Matt and I have talked about, just sharing stories of the culture of the organization and what your employees are doing, extremely valuable from a recruitment marketing standpoint, and telling the story of where veterans are today. That's an extremely important piece for the recruitment end. And then also veterans are talking about, as I mentioned before, military specialties that I'm currently in today. I want to know what they are doing in your organization. And if you have a little bit of that knowledge, even anecdotally as a recruiter, that goes a long way with members, because they can say, okay, I can see myself like this guy or woman in your organization that has gone through similar training courses. We were on similar deployments, and they're doing great and they're thriving. And that's so important when it comes to that. And I know, Matt, you had a couple other thoughts on this too, from a recruitment and obviously from the civilian world standpoint.
Yeah, so from a recruitment standpoint, I think that there has to be a balance between, from a scientific perspective, between quantitative and qualitative. And I think just from a visual perspective, this gives a good shout out to the fact, or a point that Brandon made a few moments ago about how our veteran and active duty population doesn't quite jump into a typical ATS as typically as a civilian candidate might. And there is, and this is based off of research that I've seen externally, as well as research that's been conducted by my own organizations, that the need for engagement and validation ties in, especially with social media, with having interaction back and forth. So I think that this shows this. The other thing that this shows, and I don't think Brendan intended for this, but this is something that I called out to him as we were walking through this a while back, is that what we do also know is that our military population is more inclined to search and apply for jobs via mobile devices. So ensuring that you have like a mobile friendly, or just an overall what we would call responsive design to your website, your careers website, is instrumental in getting that additional engagement with the veteran population. So just wanted to call that out about these specific visuals here.
Totally agree, Matt. And we find on RallyPoint, it's 80% of our members are logging in on mobile. So couldn't agree more that mobile is where the attention is with our community, and 100% having tools that enable that candidate flow, the least resistance, path of least resistance as possible as they go through the process is great. And then you look at the next slide, we're actually starting to get into just more of these types of conversations. We talked about the MOS, military specialty, the veteran-friendly terms, but if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently? And time again, we see members that are talking about wishing they had started that process sooner, wishing they had gotten the certification or the training that was going to really get them a foothold in the organization that they now potentially want to work for. There's a lot of those types of comments that we see from members where they really wish they had found and locked onto that passion sooner, and they would have maybe not been stuck in the spin cycle like me 3 times as they got out of the military. But that is definitely a point of frustration. And then the last piece, which you all probably have unique ways of onboarding veterans, but when I joined the first organization out of the military, I saw something in my personnel paperwork when I onboarded through HR that was calling out a protected veteran. And it was very foreign to me as to what that term meant. And I think the Department of Labor has a great flow chart that tells exactly what this is, but I never got that when I was onboarding, and nobody truly told me what it was. So I skipped over it. I drove on and never checked the box. And I think a core piece to hiring veterans is making sure they're identified. And so in that process, if you're still using terms like protected veteran, it's good, probably a good thing just to explain that to vets as they come through and as they're starting to fill out paperwork. I've had some good, fun conversations with vets on the way they've interpreted that in the past, but we'll leave that there. The next piece I'll cover here is the employers and the way they're engaging on the site. Two quick examples on the far left and the far right, Tesla and McKesson. These organizations you can see are focusing on trying to help veterans find that next mission set that they're going to be excited about. As my career was and a lot of other vets, we're working around incredibly exciting technology. We love that technology and also seeing it eventually adopted by the civilian sector after we've used DoD funds to build it. But you can see how Tesla's doing that there with their electric vehicle technology concept of how do you see the future of this? McKesson just trying to have you be on the design team of shaping the future of healthcare. We need that purpose. We want that mission set. And these are two really good examples of how the employers are engaging and trying to really have veterans visualize what's happening there and how they can be a part of it. And then I talked to Matt about the Amazon piece. You know, this conversation around translating your skills from military to civilian, this is an open box of information. Members are constantly talking about how they do this. So when you're looking at driving engagement, questions like this really go a long way. And I know, Matt, from a recruitment marketing end, you probably have a few thoughts on this one too.
Yeah, I think that it's important to not be afraid to, from an outbound perspective, ask the questions that you don't know the answer to. I know that, you know, especially post 9/11 and our advancement within technology within the talent acquisition space, we've become very accustomed to utilizing various different vendors, whoever they may be, that offer up military skills translators, whether or not they're incorporated into your ATS or to your careers website, or just as a standalone product, but they only go so far and they're ever evolving. Technology's changing, the military skills are changing. So I think that this is a great example. And I just brought this up because Brandon showed me this specific visual. I was like, well, you know, this actually brings up a really good point, is that, again, the engagement should be, if you don't know the questions to ask, or if you don't know the answers to questions that you have, then just ask them. Like, go just as much as we would expect that our job candidates are going out and asking questions on various social media platforms. It's totally acceptable and actually validating for talent acquisition professionals to go out to that community themselves and ask those questions. You know, the other thing too is that this specific Amazon example that we have here is sort of validation that sometimes, and this drives back to a point I made earlier, where you, from a scientific perspective, drawing the line between what's qualitative, what's quantitative, and what's more valuable. Sometimes getting that qualitative information is more educating to the recruiter or talent acquisition professional, leader, whoever, versus just relying on, you know, Big Brother or the robot, you know, translating a code into this specific job code. So I just found that specific Amazon example interesting and a good example of how TA professionals can educate themselves on those skills translations, because like I said, it's not an exact science.
Yeah, 100%. And I think really valuable to just be a part of that engaging conversation, know that it's a challenge for both sides, both understanding the translation of it, for us trying to get our resumes into a format, you know, that's going to be legible and understand, you know, the civilian side can understand. So it's, again, another good example of ways, you know, employers are getting lots of engagement from the military community. In the last few slides, I know we're running up quickly on time, so I won't spend a ton of time on these, but just anecdotally, next slide shares an example of a way of recruiters using RallyPoint to almost reverse engineer the way that what veterans are thinking about and what we wish recruiters knew. Quick takeaway there is we have this thing called military bearing, and sometimes it comes off as curt, direct, blunt, and not the way you would typically expect to interact with somebody in a job interview. And so it is humorous in some of these responses that we get, but just know that there is a lot of other responses below this one that are really helpful when you start to open up the question to veterans as to, what do you think the civilian world should know more about? So this is, again, just another good example of a question that a recruiter is using to drive engagement. Matt, I'll let you cover the talent communities piece in the next slide. This is really exciting for me. I've always loved how CLO doesn't just post jobs and get information and blast information to veterans, but you really cultivated a community, especially in RallyPoint. And I want to give you a chance to talk about this part.
Yeah, I think it's important for any organization to develop a talent community. And you can do that via various ways, but just having, and this goes above and beyond just the applicants that you have into your applicant tracking system, but more so developing a talent community that's engaged with content that you're providing out. And I'll just run through these quickly, and I hate reading word for word, so I'll try not to do that. But, just building a consistent veteran-oriented message within all of your postings that go onto your ATS, understanding that, if you are using, whether it's Taleo, Workday, whoever, your jobs are being scraped somewhere, somehow. So especially for jobs that you want to attract the military population or the veteran population, or for all jobs regardless, if you're including that within your employer brand, that is consistently proving to be helpful. Making sure that your career website has a landing, if you think, even if you scroll to the bottom where it says like about recent news, whatever, if there's a page like for our vets or something specific that's both content as well as a landing page that's specific to the military and the open opportunity to veterans, that's very helpful. One thing I didn't include here was within your EEO statement. I know as we progress as a society, the affinity groups continue to grow, but ensuring that veteran status is part of your equal opportunity statement is crucial. I think something else that I touched on before is training the recruiters and your talent acquisition managers on the veteran and military job skills, and not just relying on the technology behind a job translator. Those job translators are important, they're relevant, and they have some accuracy, but there does need to be a qualitative measurement to the translation of those skills. So the better the talent acquisition professional is able to translate those, the increase in conversions of applicants to hires will likely increase as well. Capitalizing on segmented social media presence for hiring veterans, looking at potentially creating a Facebook page for, I'm using one specific example, but a Facebook page that's specific to hiring veterans for your organization that you can tie to, and there's a way to do this, tie to your corporate Facebook page. And again, I'm using Facebook just as an example, but knowing that many organizations have separate Facebook pages for, say, their consumer brand and then their employment brand. Some combine them to the two, but there's a way to segment out and build a sub page that ties up into where you can specifically focus on a social media page, I'll just call it, that is specific to veteran and military hiring initiatives. And then also look at potential partners that can provide you with resources and consultancies with, how to go about, how to engage with the community, how to get access to the community. Me and my role at CLO, I'm completely agnostic. I know Brandon and I are speaking in tandem, but I'll use RallyPoint as an example. I mean, there's others that I work with, but since Brandon's on the line here, like, for example, with RallyPoint, like what they can do to help meet your objectives and build from there. But again, like tying back to your initial point, Brendan, like just building the talent communities and figuring out the way to do it. I know that some organizations don't have the technical or financial capabilities to be as advanced. And I'm going back to my 7 years recently with TMP, where I ran UPS. You know, their military recruitment strategy was through the roof, but they had a huge budget. Completely understood that not everyone has a UPS style budget, right? So knowing that there's still ways to do that at little to no cost, where, you know, it takes time and it takes thought, but it doesn't necessarily take money. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, totally agree. And the next slide actually is a great example of pretty simple processes that the Tesla team has put in place. I've walked the floor of the Fremont factory, seen the exciting technology there, and also the way that they're identifying their veterans. They have, as simple as it is, t-shirts that identify vets to each other, and they're on the floor and they get excited, and they, you know, are having a pretty motivated day when you walk in there and you see the way vets are excited to get up and go to work. It's of course the technology, but it's also that they know they're alongside, you know, brothers and sisters that served with them. And so when you look at your organization, as Matt was saying, there's a lot of other types of technology, resource groups, social media groups you can create. But, you know, how are you identifying your vets to the rest of the organization? Are you just sending us an email on Veterans Day and Military Appreciation Month, which is coming up next month in May? Those are great things to do, but what does the everyday strategy look like? And I've always thought Tesla's done an exemplary job of identifying their vets, connecting them, and just creating that level of morale that we really missed in the military. And the last piece I'll say is from an ESGR standpoint. If you're not aware, it's the employer support of the Guard and Reserve. There's so many veterans or service members that are still serving in some capacity, and they're going to drill weekends, 1 weekend a month. Highly recommend you look at ESGR and partnering with them, because that is an initial indication from a veterans and service member standpoint. We know you are approved through ESGR. We know our jobs are ultimately going to be taken care of if we get mobilized and we go on a deployment. They focus on providing those resources and making sure organizations are properly thinking about the things they need to do when that mobilization happens. So wanted to call them out as a very key resource. I highly recommend anybody, if you're not currently partnered with them, definitely take a look at their organization. And then lastly, I know we're almost up on time, but the COVID-19 impact is real. I wanted to share the polling that we're seeing within the military community on RallyPoint. Roughly 48% of our members have been impacted in some capacity, whether it's their benefits or pay, or losing their job altogether. So I wanted to call this out, is that we are seeing members very quickly moving from, you know, where they were one day in using the skills they had in the military, of picking up, and as I mentioned, the spin cycle continues for us as veterans, and really just trying to figure out where we're going to land next. And I wanted to share this data with you because it was a poll that we launched about 2.5 weeks ago, and we're trying the best that we can to better connect our community to great employers like yourselves that are out there. I think that is all I have, Lauren. I know, I'm sorry, we wanted to leave a little bit more time for questions, but I wanted to hand back off to you to make your remarks as well.
Thanks so much, guys. And we did have one question, Brandon, if you could just touch on this briefly. Kelly was asking, how do you market RallyPoint to active duty, transitioning military, and veterans? Is it shared in the TAPS, Soldier for Life, et cetera? Can you speak to how RallyPoint kind of works?
Yes, happy to do that. RallyPoint gains our membership, and the attraction of military to our site has come through the conversations themselves. So RallyPoint is not generating our own information and content. We're like any other social or professional platform out there. Members come because there's resources. So one of the ways is if you start typing in some very, very military specific questions, and just like how Quora, you may have run across Quora in your time of looking up questions that you need answered. RallyPoint is that hub of information for service members. So many of them through SEO and Google will find us. And also on social channels where we're pushing out peer-to-peer conversations that are publicly available. members come through and they see those really relevant conversations, and they join the community through that. So that's the sort of organic and social piece of it. And then also we have seen the Department of Labor starting to put RallyPoint as a resource, OFCCP. If you go through, RallyPoint is listed as a veteran hiring resource there. So there's a lot of other ways, and anecdotally in certain TAP classes, RallyPoint's brought up. We just don't have an official relationship with the DoD in that capacity, but our members usually just find us based on the conversations and the resources that we have in the community.
Fantastic. Well, we had one other specific question that we can follow up with afterward, and I believe that is the end of our questions. So I want to thank you both, Brandon and Matt from RallyPoint Networks and CLO RPO, for today's perspectives and expertise. What a fantastic presentation. Should you have any questions for either of our speakers today or for me, our information is here. And Matt, I can include your contact information in the follow-up email, and Brendan, I can put yours in there as well,
Yep.
If that's okay with you guys.
Yep, perfectly fine.
Great.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks to all of you for attending. Thank you again to our speakers. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Please join us again for another AJE webinar in the future, and take care and be safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.